I'm Sherri Shaulis. I'm a senior editor with AVN Magazine, and I'm here today on behalf of AVN and shush.com to interview Chauntelle Tibbals.
Hello.
Hi. So tell us a little bit about who you are and why we're talking today.
Oh, well, who I am. Well, I'm a sociologist, so that means I study patterns and processes and things that happen in society. It's often confused with psychology, which is the study of the individual, but I'm a professional people watcher, sociologist. And the reason why we're here today, I'm super excited, is to talk about my book. I just released the first installment. It's a 5-part series that I'm working on, and the first one just came out. It's called You Study What? You Study What?
I love that title.
Well, if I could tell you how many times people have said that to me, I don't know. So it's sort of an ironic title, but it's called You Study What? One Sociologist's Journey Through Sex, Society, and Adult Entertainment. So I'm very excited about it.
And part of this reason the book came up is because you've actually worked in the adult industry, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. We were talking that you know, you're a young, beautiful woman, and so working in the adult industry, when you tell people, oh, this is what I did, and you did it as part of your research, they have a lot of misconceptions.
Yeah, misconceptions is putting it mildly. So what I did, I went to graduate school in Texas, born and raised in LA, but I decided I would go to Texas to do my Ph.D. work and do my work about adults. So part of what you do when you're writing a dissertation is you do original research. So I did ethnographic and interview research with a bunch of different folks in the industry and a bunch of different shows and sets and things. So it's a wide variety of stuff. But I spent a considerable amount of time working with one particular company. I was very, very lucky to find a place and a space, good people that would trust me to come into their business. And it was about a total of 6 months, and I helped out with the PR. I was an assistant. I carried boxes. I ferried people around. I did any number of not glamorous things that, as a person who works in the adult industry yourself, you will know that it is not all unicorns and rainbows and fun parties. A lot of it is hot, sweaty, spray painting signs in an alley. I did that.
Did all that.
Yeah.
Now, how did you initially, I mean, there's so many areas, when you say you're a sociologist, there's so many types of people to study, so many areas that you could cover. Why adults?
Well, it's kind of an interesting, sort of long story, but I'll be brief. Like I said, I grew up here, and I was actually doing my master's research at Cal State Northridge. And, I'd been at UCLA, I was out in the Antelope Valley when I was a kid, all over the place, but it was the first time I'd ever spent like a really considerable daily amount of time in the valley. And as I was there working on other things, but my master's research is about restauranting and waitressing, presentation of self, which is interesting.
Presentation of self, though, that theme carries through.
Definitely, definitely. But when I was doing that, I would go out and I would, get coffee with friends or be out and about somewhere. And I started noticing little indicators that the adult industry was both here and huge, and that nobody really even noticed or cared. Probably because, and I know this is a true fact now, many people obviously live in the valley and work in the industry. It's a huge, organization, a huge field, space of work. So a lot of people. And what I started to notice at the same time was my specialization in sociology is gender and sexualities. So especially back in those days when I was first starting out, I was reading a lot of theory about sex and sexuality and sex work, and I kind of gravitated to commercial sex. I thought it was really, really interesting. And a lot of the stuff that I had, or a lot of the stuff that I was reading talked about how porn was akin to sex trafficking and exploitation and just any number of bad things. And so I reached this kind of point where I was at sort of a crossroads where I am out here in this world looking around the valley and I'm seeing no sex trafficking, not that sex trafficking is something you can see, but I was seeing no dungeons. I mean, most of the buildings in the valley don't have basements, much less dungeons. It struck me something that was off, that there could be all of this exploitative and illegal activity allegedly going on. And I was reading this in published works, But in this nice, friendly little San Fernando Valley, where it's not to say that there aren't bad things that happen, but the level of depravity that I was reading about and just the real world daily life experiences weren't matching up.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed an interesting puzzle to me, and when I moved to Texas to start working on a bigger project, because a dissertation is a much bigger project than a master's level project, I decided I wanted to explore that. And I didn't really know what. I just knew there was something happening and that people weren't addressing it.
Yeah.
So that was that. And now here we are today, 10 years later. Actually more than 10 years now. Time flies.
Now, you said you did get quite a bit of cooperation from the industry, which seems to be, that's not always been the case, I think.
No, and interestingly, I was very, very lucky, and I didn't always get a lot of cooperation. Partly because I did a lot of background research. I had no affiliation, connection, experience with the industry whatsoever when I first started. I hate saying studying because it sounds so
clinical.
Yeah, these ants that I'm studying. But when I started kind of exploring things and trying to figure out what was going on. So I didn't really have anybody to kind of guide me or hook me up with contacts or anything like that. So I actually ended up doing a lot of archival research through AVN. Was amazing. I personally give a lot of credit to all of my background work to Mark Kearns because, man, is he not a historian and just brilliant. And so much of his stuff was really informative back in those days to kind of get an accurate and referenced picture of what was going on. I started looking through different types of content, websites, stuff like that, to just kind of get, I mean, it was such a removed picture, but just a picture of how the industry was even structured. And it's funny to think back on that now, to think that I knew anything, because I knew nothing.
Yeah.
But I knew a little bit. I knew enough to go to people and say, this is what I know. This is what I hear people saying, and these things don't seem to be matching up. So I reached out to a couple different people beforehand, and they were like, school person, thank you, goodbye. But again, I was lucky to connect with a really kind, forward-thinking group of people who trusted me enough, I mean, thank goodness, to let me in. And I mean, always will be appreciative to that group of people. But I keep saying group of people because it's, it's in research, so it's anonymized, but they're still there.
What it is that the industry, for as wide and as big and as open as it is, and as varied as it is, it's still a very close group of people. And how difficult was it for you to kind of get in and, tell these people, look, there's a disconnect between what the outside world sees and what's really going on?
Well, it was actually very difficult, and it's something that I've written about quite a bit, was the close-knit nature of the industry. And I think that's part and parcel to our sort of wider social attitudes about sex and sexuality. We like to talk a lot about things, but sort of we haven't experienced this. We don't really like to engage sex or sex work in a real manner. We don't like to educate our young people about sex behavior, sex practice. So you end up with a wider society that is really uncomfortable with what the industry does, and they don't really even know what the industry does, but they evaluate the industry about these kind of fantasies and things that they have. And so almost as kind of a self-preservation tactic, I've noticed, and I think this is actually totally true, the industry has really kind of closed itself up, and there's this very, very thick, very dense bubble around it that keeps people who are going to misrepresent it or just kind of use it as this salacious space to stare at or generate traffic or whatever it is that they use it for.
Or used to serve a point if they have an ulterior motive.
Right.
Or,
but without ever being informed. And it's interesting because a lot of the time, even when a person from outside the industry, be it another academic or a media person, asks a question, so they get that answer from a member of the industry, but then they always kind of take it and put it out into some different context and tell their own story with it. And I've seen this happen over and over and over again. It's really distressing to think that, media outlets that generally we wouldn't question. I mean, we would question in terms of their politics or their leanings, but we would expect them to get their facts correct.
Correct,
And I read almost on a daily basis something that is completely taken out of context, completely overblown, just a flat-out lie. Like, that happens all the time. The thing, and we were talking about this a bit earlier, is that that sales or revenue statistic, the 10
yes.
to 12 billion
dollar porn industry. Yes.
What? What?
Yeah, that number doesn't exist.
That number does not exist,
Yeah.
and it's frustrating to me because people say that, and I read that, and I tell people that it is not true. That it is not true. Well, what is true? I'm like, I don't know.
No one knows.
No one knows, because there's not a capture, and that's one thing that I've really had a lot of difficulty with, is attempting to kind of find numbers that resonate that I can then use to substantiate the claims that I'm making. But then on the flip side, having no resources other than myself and my own 2 feet to kind of get that information. And a demographic capture of that level, like what is the actual revenue of the industry and what parts of it are we talking about? Are we talking about, content sales? Are we talking about webcam stuff? Are we talking about advertising dollars? Are we talking about novelty and distribution retail stores? What are we talking about? And then does it go out into like exotic dancing or any number of other things? To get that kind of information, that's a huge undertaking. And at least in my experience, there's not an external organization that's looking to throw down a year's worth of support so I can find that information out. So
well, and you might not have people willing to provide it either, because as much as the industry's close-knit, that we're an industry, they're very close-knit that we're a company and we're not going to release information to our competitors.
Right, and I mean, that's very, very true. And, something like that, even something that was, if you went to a bunch of different companies or outlets or whatever, and you got particular information that was accurate, and then you took it all and you anonymized it, so nobody knew where it was coming from, whose it was, and you didn't cross-compare, so I didn't say A compared to B, but just took all of that and put it in a big pot and just got a statistic that, number of producers, the actual sort of average size of the performer pool and how often they turn over, things like that. Just, there's a list of 10 little facts that I wish we had that would make such a difference.
I wish we had it too.
I wish we had it too. And one day I'll go get it. I will. I'll find a way.
I do.
I'm trying.
You touched on part of what spurred you on in your research, and then to write this first in the series of the books, is that there was this perception of what the industry is like, and then you were finding out the reality of what the industry was like. You yourself have kind of dealt with what people's perception of your work is and what your work actually is as well. Yes. And not even just your work, but of you personally. Yes. When they hear, oh, you worked in the industry.
You study what?
Yeah, exactly. You study what?
Yeah.
But the fact that you actually worked in the industry as well. You did a internship with a company in the industry. And so people's perceptions of what you must have done.
What I must have done, and I'm like I said, I was carrying boxes of DVDs. It was very dangerous. Yeah, no, it's interesting, the responses, and my reasons for putting this book series out is, I have since the day this work began till hopefully it doesn't end, but till I stop. There's always been people who've questioned my motivations and why I must be interested, and it's fascinating because, I have a lot of friends who are academics and who study various things, and I have never once heard anybody else say, why do you want to study terrorism so much? Are you a terrorist?
Yeah.
Or why do you want to study like HIV in Brazil so badly?
Yeah.
Are you Brazilian or do you have HIV?
Yeah.
People never ask those questions. But
because
they ask those questions about
you.
me, which it just is part and parcel to the need for this work, because again, there's so many fictions attached to it, and it just so much misinformation. So it kind of used to bother me in some respects, but not really. Whatever, it is what it is. But the interesting thing too about this book, because it's a collection of essays, and so it's short. Each one will be about 5 or 6 depending, and just kind of dripping them out. But they're about, a sort of a sociological take on things that I've seen and done. So, there are stories from set, there are stories about, I saw this in content, I saw that in content, comparing them. There are also stupid little adventures of like the first time I did this or that, the first time I went to AEE, the first time I went
That's always an experience.
Yeah, and it was. And I mean, the first time I went into a porn store, like, oh wow. But these are things that I actually experienced, and people care about what happens at AE. People are curious. There's a first time for everybody to enter an adult store. It's not something. It's not information that you're just born with, which is fascinating to me. But when I started to put the proposals of the book together, and had a couple sample essays, I did shop it around a little bit with various publishers and different people in that section of media. And it was interesting the response I got, because everybody was interested. Everybody was really interested, and then they wanted to know they want to know what the girls are like, and please tell me about this. We're talking about this over here. Stop asking me about gossip questions, but then I started to realize that that's what people wanted. People wanted gossip, or they wanted a salacious expose about, my goodness, what is all of the stuff that you saw that will just either curl my toes or blow my mind. And that's not what I wanted to do. Because for as fun as it is to think that everything's a big party, and for as fun as the big parties sometimes are, this is work. It's an industry. It's an occupation. This is an office. We're in an office where there's phones and bills and things.
And people wearing clothes and doing work.
People wearing clothes and going home and having regular lives and having regular work lives here. I mean, even the space that we're at right now is no different from a construction office or a media office of any other nature. And so when I realized that what people wanted was just more of the same fiction.
That they've been getting.
I decided that I would just keep my essays to myself and put them out on my own, and that's what I did. I didn't want to lose control of my work in that way. I didn't want to perpetuate the problem. I wanted to put something out there that maybe is a first step in some sort of solution or reframing. So that's why I did it this way.
Well, as part of that solution and that reframing, I think that we can both admit that even today, more so than when you did start studying this and start looking at the industry, that a lot more women have always participated in the industry, but the end user, women watching porn, women demanding what type of stories they want to see, what type of sex they want to see. Have you seen in your research a lot of that change?
Oh, the shift is amazing. Even without even being archival about it, so without talking about content from the 70s or 80s or anything, even in the past 10 years, when I have actually been very, very in tune with what is being produced kind of on a daily basis, the shift is really startling and incredible. And you see people, like Stormy Daniels or Jackie St. James producing this really different content. And it's really interesting because, Stormy Daniels and Jackie St. James, as examples, both of them work for companies that have been around for a very, very long time. So the willingness of people in this business to reach out to new consumers, to create new product, to change. I mean, obviously there are diehards, and there's obviously stuff that people want to see, and those threads have been consistent. But the idea that porn is just this nasty jerk-off stuff, I don't think that it's just that. I don't think that was ever true, but it is wholly not true today. Not in the slightest.
Now, tell me a little bit specifically about, you said this is the first in a 5-part series that you plan to publish, and each series, each installment is going to have essays. So tell me a little bit about the essays you collected for You Study What, and then what the other installments will be.
Okay. Well, I kind of tried to make them a balance, because again, I have the tendency to be a little too philosophical sometimes. So each one of them is a good balance between Silly Adventures of Chauntelle. So we have a couple Silly Adventures of Chauntelle, a couple reviews of content and things that kind of think about bigger philosophical issues. So for example, in the first installment, I have this story, and it's called Average Joe's and the Monster Cock. And it sounds a little funny, but basically it's about running into a friend of mine in the warehouse of an adult novelty company. And I was like, hello, friend of mine, what are you doing here? And he said, they just made this mold of my penis. Look at these things. And you know, there they were, mold of his penis. I'm like, why do you need those today? What are you, I don't even want to know. But
yeah.
But there was this idea, and then it got me to thinking that there's a lot of discussion about what porn does to real women.
Women, yeah.
Which is, I find so tedious, because women who make porn are also real women. So, I mean, I don't know why there's that.
And the women who watch porn
are
also real women.
So, you know, I was thinking about that, and that kind of rhetoric is out there, you know, that difference, and it's interesting and it's to be explored. But something dawned on me when I was standing there in this warehouse looking at these molds of this person's penis, which was well over average length, was that what happens to real guys when they see this actual literal mold of another man? Because this is his real penis.
Yeah.
Here it is. Why don't we ever talk about what porn does to men is the question. Does to, obviously, there's a whole issue there. But just things like that, where it's a little snippet of a real thing that happened, and then kind of a bigger social impact discussion that comes from it, you know, and all written in a sort of fun kind of way.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it is. It's very fun. It's very accessible. It's a very entertaining read, but also very educational, which I really enjoyed about that.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going for.
Yes.
So I'm glad to know that I.
So then, what's coming in the series? Then, what else can we expect?
I don't want to say more of the same structure, but different stories. Actually, in the second volume, which should be out in October, there is one exploration about what is feminist in content, because that's something we hear a lot about now, is this idea of feminist porn. But feminist porn is something that's very not defined.
Yeah.
And then it's also interesting to see women content producers, be they performers or people who are directing, whatever, say, I'm not making feminist porn, I make porn.
Well, I was going to say, there was a time where anything made by a woman, or specifically to a female audience, was automatically labeled feminist porn, whether it was or not.
But I mean, you think back to back in the day when Jewel Denial was making some of the most hardcore stuff.
Yeah.
And okay.
Candida Royale, and
and she had a different tone. But it's the idea that just because you're a woman making porn, it's thus feminist.
Yeah.
No. And the idea that you have to be labeled a feminist or labeled feminist when just people seem to think that, it's interesting. And there's some examples of things I've seen recently where you watch some content and the themes and the explorations and the stuff that happens is so decidedly empowering for women, a very interesting exploration, really thoughtful content. The one that really comes to mind that really stuck with me was actually this cute, funny movie called Divorcees. It's a Wicked Pictures film, and it's directed by Stormy Daniels. And just the most feminist of stories and components you could possibly imagine. It's a story about middle-aged chicks getting their mojo back, being friends, not fighting, not being catty, not selling each other out, just like a great women's friend story. But that example would never be regarded as feminist porn because it's produced by a mainstream porn company.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating because I understand why we as a society put things into categories and label. It helps us organize, and there's reasons for it. But at the same time, there's always a good and bad to everything. And the bad part about that, or maybe the challenging part, is that when you put stuff into categories, or you say, oh, this person made it, so it can't be worth consideration, or it can't speak to these needs, that's not a good thing. In fact, you miss so much in doing that. So that's one thing. There's a discussion of that. There's other more sort of personal, silly discussions. So there's one story. This is so embarrassing, but it's a story.
We love embarrassing.
Yes, we love embarrassing. It's a story about me from my undergraduate days, and for whatever reason, I got it into my head that I wanted to go to the Limley on Sunset because they were showing disco dolls and hot skin.
Ooh.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was the 3D, whatever. And so I gathered a bunch of friends of mine, and we went to go watch it, and it was me. Like, I said, I want to go watch this movie, let's go, blah, blah, blah. I knew not, this was probably 1997 when this happened. So I had heard little, like, snippets in the news about what porn was and blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, I'm going to go check it out. And so I went there with my
big
friends.
Bad girl.
Yeah, I'm a big bad girl. And I went there with all my friends, a couple other women, a couple men, and everybody goes in there, and I immediately was like, oh God, what have I done? I can't watch this movie. And I actually got up and walked out because I was so mortified and offended by what I thought I had saw. And it was so fascinating because I was huffing and puffing and whatever. I've since gone back and watched the film, and I think back to my 20-year-old self or whatever. I'm like, what did I think that I saw?
Yeah.
And that one, it's an amusing story in of itself to imagine me huffing and puffing my way out of a movie theater. But it's also interesting to think about what's actually on screen and what we take from it, and how those interpretations are fueled by, you know, wider ideas about society or porn or whatever. And that's really the only conclusion I can come up to, is that, you know, I went there and I watched this silly, retro, early 80s movie that was as cheesy as all get out, you know.
Big hair and
and the music and the this
the tan
and
lines.
the tan lines.
Oh yeah.
And just, and interesting too, because it was you know, it was made back in the early 80s, so the production was different, where, you know, there'd be people running through the room while other people were having sex on the side. So it was a different type of content too. It wasn't just that scene, maybe some kind of story scene, or just scene. And it was just interesting to think about why I couldn't at that point in time watch it, and to kind of try to reflect upon that. So there's a lot of self-reflection as well.
I think that's a good point for a lot of the viewers of Shush.com, is that your perceptions of what porn is, or what the adult industry is, you know, it might have been influenced by something you found in your parents' bedroom from the 70s or the 80s. And like you said, things have changed so much, perceptions have changed so much, that we're seeing a trend both within and outside of the industry, I think, that a lot more women are taking control, not only of the content that's produced, but of what's being purchased.
Right, and that's the thing that's so interesting to me. The discussion about porn has so long been that there are these puppet masters here feeding sex in particular versions to people.
And like you said, they're controlling these young women, and, you know, these poor girls, you know, what must have happened in their life that they're in this industry.
Right. And I don't know if maybe I've missed the boat this entire time, but I have never come across one single producer who says, I'm just making this to give it away for the good of humanity. This is a business. And so consequently there is a flow. So even though we may not like what this says about us in some instances, people make content that people purchase. If people don't purchase, or I'm going to try this because that little thing over there worked. I'm going to take it a step further, or take it a step to the side, or something like that.
It's classic supply and demand.
Yeah, so it's not that porn is this one-way river pushing stuff out into the world. It's a synergistic relationship. Content comes, it's made by the industry, but it's informed by the public, and back and forth and back and forth. So you see that when lines disappear, or, you know, pegging is an interesting thing to think about, that was around in the 70s and all but disappeared, and now is having this huge resurgence. That's fascinating to me. But, you know, you get this idea that it's a one-way street, and it absolutely isn't. And so thinking about what that says about us is an interesting thing too.
So is there anything else that you want to touch on, or make sure that the viewers are aware of, or about you or the series, or?
Just that I'm really excited about it. I'm excited to do it. I'm happy to, you know, because I write academically quite often. You can find a lot of my work in law journals or sociology journals, and those peer-reviewed things, those, you know, big, long, 5,000 words that have been vetted by 20 different people, and I don't even know what they say in the end. But a lot of my work is there, and I'm really happy to get work out there that is a bit more accessible, and I think more timely, like more daily life oriented. And I think, there's a lot of little snippets in each of these things that I think people will really find useful. Maybe just in terms of, spurring a line of thought or telling them something new that they didn't know, or just letting people know that it's not all that different from anything else out there. Yeah.
And what's the best way if people want to read You Study What? What's the best way for them to access that?
Right now, it's only available on Amazon, which is very exciting. So you can get it there, and it's only available in ebook or sort of, Kindle copy right now. But it's very easy to get, and eventually, probably in the next 6 months, I will release all of them as a hard copy collection. But right now, just the excitement of making them available to the world, I've decided snippets at a time. So yeah, you can go to Amazon and find it there.
Perfect. Well, Chauntelle, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you, Sherri. It was
and
lovely.
I want to thank everybody from AVN and Shush.com for making this interview possible.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.